Monday. Welcome In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. And man, I feel like we have so much to talk about today. We had Indiana football over the weekend moving to 10-0. Indiana basketball moves to 2-0 after kind of a scary first half against Eastern Illinois before they pulled away. And all that's fine and dandy, but I'm actually going to start off this show with a little bit of some personal news, if you will, right? And it's not job-related news or anything like that. Usually when people share personal news, especially when you think about it being in this field, usually they're sharing a job change or something like that. But I am about ready to share something that I've been having to hold back for really since Labor Day, actually. And you see me taking that breath there. It's because I'm nervous. And it's not that it's something that's anything to be nervous about, but anytime you're about ready to go through some sort of change and you're going to make it public, no matter how big of a public announcement it is, and this isn't like a massive platform of it or anything, but it is something that I've been excited to share for, ever since I found out that this was going to be something that would be happening in my life. And it's not only happening to my life, but it's my wife's life too. And I'm sure many of you know where I'm going with this, but my wife, Alicia, and I are expecting our first child. And today we found out this morning, as a matter of fact, what we're having. And by the way, before I even share this is already public information. If you're friends with me on Facebook or follow me on, it's not on Twitter or anything, but my wife put this out on Facebook. And that's why I'm making it public today. But why not do a fun little agenda-ish reveal? I'll put it on camera just in case you haven't seen it. But we are having a little girl. My wife and I are having a girl. And we're both super excited. And just wanted to start off the show with that. And I know that's some of you may not care one bit about that. And that's totally fine. But I'll just say this. It is my show. And there's going to be moments where I want to share things about my life that, hopefully they're usually exciting or fun, or maybe they'll be not so fun on occasions, but I definitely wanted to get that off my chest. And that's not the best way to put it, but I wanted to share that with you guys this morning because I don't think I would have made it through the rest of the show without sharing that news, because it's all, I'm sure those of you who listen that are parents, I'm sure you remember the moment you found out you were going to be a dad or a mom, whatever it may be, whenever you found out if you're having a boy or a girl. Like, it's a feeling that, you hope never goes away, right? There's a lot of fun emotions that come along with that. And again, my wife, Alicia, and I are beyond excited. And hopefully, wouldn't it be something, right, to be able to say to our little girl, and I say this tongue in cheek, is more so for fun, but imagine if down the road I'm telling my daughter about the previously undefeated national champion Indiana Hoosier football team that was born, or that season took place the year that you were born. And, I use that as a fun little transition into, my gosh, this Indiana football team continues to amaze me in so many different ways, right? And I guess before I get into it, and also Mitchell Paige will be on with us today, so we'll dive deeper into really his thoughts, and I'll save the majority of the football talk for that, but I do want to share my thoughts too, just my individual, just kind of feelings on where this season is going and the journey we've been on, all that type of stuff. But first of all, apologies for no post-game wrap-up show. Didn't expect that to be the case. Am I being completely honest? I was available to do one, but I would have been on my own. And the previous night, I had a very, I'll just say this, I didn't sleep very much. And I was not in the right headspace to be doing a post-game wrap-up show, whether it be good or bad, because obviously Indiana won and it would have been fun, but I don't think the product would have been what I would have wanted it to be had I decided to do one, especially by myself, just because we didn't have a lot of people available to hop on and do something with me. So again, apologies for that. I'll just say it's totally on me, because I had the option to do one and I chose not to do one. And hopefully I don't have that happen again for the remainder of the season. But anyway, to my thoughts on this Indiana football team. I guess we'll just start with the obvious. They are 10-0 for the first time ever. There's not a single human being, living or deceased, that has ever seen an Indiana Hoosiers football team that won 10 games, whether it be 10-0 or, getting to 10 wins some other way. We have officially seen something that is not only is it historical, but it is a true first time for the Indiana football. And there's been a lot of firsts, honestly, if we're thinking about what Indiana's done. I mean, having a first-year head coach not have a loss and doing all of these things. I mean, there's so many ways you could talk about how amazing what's happening with this Indiana football program right now, that it's just crazy. You'll hear me and Mitchell talk about later. And again, I hate whenever I talk about the conversation that you're going to hear, because I don't want to spoil the conversation. It feels like I'm just rehashing it, but so maybe I'll just leave that to the side. But man, the sky, if I haven't said this enough already, is really and truly the limit for this Indiana football team. They have a bye this week, and it really could not come at a much better time. When you play a game that is so, physical and emotional, the way that this one was, and the way that your back was kind of against the wall late, and Michigan really had multiple chances to take the lead on you late, and Indiana's defense kept bowing up and stepping up to the plate and doing their part whenever the offense was unable to. Because I will say this, that even though that Michigan team was 5-4 coming into the weekend, that team still is loaded with NFL caliber talent, especially on defense. And they made it difficult for Indiana's offense, especially in that second half. But they were still able to do what previous Indiana teams have never been able to do, and that's come away in a close game. We've not seen Indiana be in a close game that late into the fourth quarter this year. And we talked before at the beginning of the season, Curt Cignetti and him doing so well in one-score games, that, this was his first opportunity to really kind of show the Indiana fans, like, hey, I can win all sorts of ways. I can dominate teams, but also whenever we're not playing as good as we want to, we can finish those games as well. And Indiana showed that. I'm sure the national perspective is going to be, oh, wow, Indiana finally showed some give, and they weren't able to beat a mid-tier Michigan team as badly as some of the other teams they've beaten so far. And that's fine. Say what you will. But I still firmly believe that, for the most part, that game was a college football playoff play-in game for Indiana. I think the only reason that Indiana should have to sweat missing the playoff at this point is if they just go into Columbus 2 weeks from now and get housed. And I don't think that will happen. There's been zero indicator this season that this Indiana team will struggle with anybody. They may eventually lose, especially when you play against an Ohio State, an Oregon, or any of the top-level teams that will be in the college football playoff. They may lose any of those games, and that would be unfortunate. But I also don't see any scenario where they just get completely killed in any of those games. So, and that's the only thing I believe that will make, because, when you play Purdue, there's not going to be a single member of that committee that will look at that Purdue game and take anything away from it that will be positive for Indiana. Because what will happen is when you get to Purdue, first of all, you're not going to lose that game. I hate to kind of get ahead of myself, but this is a terrible Purdue team. There's no reason this Cignetti coached Indiana football team will lose to Purdue in a few weeks. But let's just say you mosey around and you make it a little bit closer than it should. I don't know what the spread's going to be, but let's just say Purdue covers the spread and you only beat them by, 18 or 19 points or something like that, as opposed to beating them by 30. The committee will be like, oh, wow, Indiana should have beaten Purdue by a lot more than, whatever the spread was giving them, or that type of a thing. So the Purdue game can only hurt you if you don't completely blow the doors off the Boilermakers. So that game does nothing for you. Everything comes down to really what happens against Ohio State in a couple of weeks. And if you win that game, then you go into Purdue, you do what I just mentioned, you beat them in some way, shape, or form, and you probably enter the Big Ten championship game with the two top teams in the country facing off against each other, which is absolutely insane. If this season cannot be any more insane, right? I mean, we've seen. I'm at a loss for words, clearly, about what could happen over the next few weeks for Indiana football. But I guess long story short is this has been so fun to see. And I'll say this, when I was watching the game late in the fourth quarter, I haven't been that nervous for an Indiana football game in a very long time because they've not really given us any reason to be nervous. I mean, even against Michigan State 2 weeks ago when they were down 10-0, like there was a little bit of nerves just because it's like, okay, they're down 10-0. How are they going to respond? But nothing like what happened on Saturday night against Michigan, where it felt like all you needed was just one more score, but they couldn't get it done. And Michigan was, I sent this into a group chat I'm in, and I said, I feel like this is going to come down to a game-winning field goal by Michigan, because there was a point where it was 17-15, and I was worried the offense was not going to put anything else up on the board. And then that special teams play with, it wasn't Miles Price because he was out of the game at that point. Who was it? I don't have it right in front of me. I'm going to go and be completely honest right now. Normally, I've got a whole list of notes in front of me, but because of all the things that I've been doing this morning, when it comes to, the baby appointment and all that stuff, I'm running on pure adrenaline, and I'm just talking from my heart. And I usually do that anyway, right? Like I just kind of sit here and have a conversation with myself. But sometimes I have some notes to reference, especially when it comes to important things like that. But the Indiana special teams kick punt returner, which again is usually Miles Price. I don't know why I can't think of who the punt returner was, who really put Indiana in good field position to get that field goal to make it 20-15. And that was really the play of the game when it comes to sealing the deal, because I was genuinely nervous that we were heading for a Michigan game winner to, I don't want to say ice the Indiana season, because it would definitely would have been disappointing for them to not come away with the victory. But at this point in the year, even if Indiana were to have lost to Michigan and even Ohio State in 2 weeks, and then you beat Purdue, and then you finish the regular season 10-2, you can't say the season was disappointment as a whole, but you would have been able to say the finish was disappointment based on the new expectations that were there. But guess what? We don't have to have that conversation right now because they beat Michigan. And now all eyes, at least in the Big Ten, eyes on big. Shout out to Jeffrey the Greek, Jordan Eggleston, and Big Kurt. All eyes are on that Indiana-Ohio State game, because this is, I mean, there's been a lot of prove-it moments for Indiana football, right? But this is yet another, it's something they haven't been able to do, and that's beat a unanimously appreciated team, or respected team, I should say, in Ohio State. There's not a single, there may be pundits that think Ohio State's not the best team in the country, but there's not a single nationally respected person that looks at Ohio State and says that's not an elite team, right? Indiana's facing a team that if they find a way to beat them, especially on the road, then there's no reason to not have respect for the Hoosiers any longer, right? That's it. And it's unfortunate that we've had to wait this long to see it, but that's what happens. You play who's on your schedule, and you move forward from there, and hopefully you take care of business, and Indiana's done nothing but take care of business from start to finish so far this season. And I'm very excited. I will say this. I'm very happy that this upcoming week is a bye week. You get a little bit of time to prepare yourself, right, for the Indiana-Ohio State game, and really all that's on the line with that, because there are so many things on the line. Ohio State's going to have their back against the wall because they know if they lose, they're not going to the Big Ten championship. They'll probably still get in the playoff, considering they are the number 2 ranked team with that loss to Oregon. But I don't see a scenario where they lose to Indiana and get knocked out of the playoff picture. But I mean, what could happen is, I mean, that Michigan game, if Michigan is kind of peaking, which they kind of seem like they're figuring some things out a little bit, if they lose to Indiana and have to face a Michigan team that's playing some of their best football in a while, I mean, they haven't beaten Michigan in a while. So at that point, their backs are against the wall even more because they will be fighting for their playoff lives if they happen to lose to the Hoosiers at home here in a couple of weeks. So we're here, guys. We are at that moment that probably many of you, including myself, never thought was possible. And that is getting to the end of the line, right? The end of the season. And you know exactly what this team is playing for. You know what their identity is. You know what their abilities are. It's just a matter of, can you execute enough on the field to get the job done? And I am beyond excited to really see what happens here in a couple of weeks. So I guess, man, I've gone about halfway because this Mitchell Paige segment, I appreciate him. We talked for about 30 minutes in this segment. So I'll go ahead and what I'll do here, I'm going to transition to that. And then on the other side, I'll give a little bit of my thoughts on the Indiana basketball result. And I'm actually I got to keep being transparent with you guys. Let me go ahead and show you this real quick. For those of you who haven't paid attention or haven't noticed, I'm wearing a Buffalo Bills shirt right now. This is because yesterday, my wife and I went up to the Bills-Colts game in Indianapolis. And I mentioned, for those of you who are longtime watchers, viewers, are going to call it, of the show, you know that we are Bills fans, and it's kind of for an interesting reason. We never really had an NFL team before until we had a family member of ours move up to Buffalo, and then we visited them a few years ago. We went to a Bills bar, watched a Bills game, and, you know, from there on out, we're like, you know what? The Bills are our team. So for those of you who are Colts fans and, you know, are disappointed that I went to the Colts game against the Bills and didn't root for the Colts, sorry about you. But we enjoyed being at Lucas Oil Stadium to see the Bills get that win yesterday. And this was my first NFL game, my wife's first NFL game. But anyway, point being, I didn't watch the Indiana basketball game yesterday for a couple reasons. I would have rewatched it had it been on, you know, something where I could record it. Because it was on Big Ten Plus, I was like, you know what? I'll just see what happened and just kind of evaluate it from there. So I guess want to give apologies if you're disappointed that I didn't watch the game. I mean, I will be watching every game from here on out. But, I mean, we'll get into it on the other side. So let's go ahead and transition into Mitchell Paige and continue this wonderful, fun conversation about this Hoosiers football program, because they're so fun to talk about. Indiana football's never been this fun to talk about before, guys. So without further ado, let's let it roll. Joining us once again, it is, of course, Mitchell Paige on a Monday. But if you have eyes, you look into Mitchell's room, you'll see that it is nighttime. We're recording this on a Sunday today. But if you're listening and or watching, it is a Monday for you, I hope. But Mitchell, we're talking about 10-0 Hoosiers. First ever 10-win Hoosier team in history. They're 10-0. In my opinion, this was kind of a playoff play-in game, if you will. I said that a few times last week, and I still think that is the case, even if they do disappoint here one time or another in these final couple of regular season games. But hey, we're here. This team has done the unthinkable. Let's just call it that. There's not a single person preseason that said this team could win 10 games, right? Everyone always wrote off Michigan and Ohio State as the games that you knew 100%, at least you thought you knew, that this Indiana team was going to lose. And it was a tight game. This was the first time all year long where you kind of had to sweat it out. And maybe sweat it out is putting it lightly. Mitchell, you were there in person, and I'll let you kind of describe what that was like. But this is the first time that this Indiana team really had to battle until the very end of the game for this win.
Yeah, it was the first time that it feels like they've been off schedule since the opening kick of the year. I thought Michigan was really physical up front. They did a really good job making Curtis Rourke uncomfortable and getting him out of rhythm, missing throws that he normally makes. And then when he was making throws, it felt like receivers that had 2 drops all year between them couldn't catch the ball if their life depended on it.
That's an Elijah Surratt shout out, by the way.
Well, I mean, there's a couple guys that I can think of. Like
okay.
It just plays that are typically made on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, where you start to build the momentum, because that's what Indiana's done so consistently all year is converting on 3rd down, converting those short yardage, even if it's 2nd down, and just methodically destroying you. Indiana's not really a team that's going to have an 80-yard touchdown on you. They just put together 6 to 10 play drives and smash you right in the face. And they just got off schedule. When you have some drops, you have some things happen, you have some penalties. They didn't have a ton of penalties, but you just get off schedule, and then you're trying to force things. And I thought Michigan was really tough up front. Still ran the ball halfway decent, I thought. I know the numbers don't show that necessarily, but still getting what you needed to get done on offense. And it's just, I mean, I'm sure everybody that's an Indiana fan knows exactly what I'm about to say when you talk about where that game was going. We've seen that story written before 1,000 times, sometimes 8 times in a season, 9 times in a season. You have the lead in the 4th quarter. You have a chance to put it away. Things just don't happen. You have some. There was a play, the Surratt drop in the corner on like the 3-yard line that everyone talks about. I do want to talk about the penalty that the refs called on that play that inevitably got declined because it was 3rd down. I want to talk about that and some of the other things that were happening that were just interesting. But you have a chance to put them away. Don't make it happen. Give the ball back to them with 2 minutes left. It feels like they have momentum. That's a game that Indiana gives up a touchdown with 5 seconds left in the game. Feels like for the past
in any year except this year.
20 years. Right. And it was the complete opposite. When it was time to bow up, they did. They put pressure on the quarterback that they hadn't really been getting. You smash the run, and you just don't let them breathe. And the defense didn't let them breathe. Now, that is not a potent offense by any means. That's one of the worst quarterbacks, the duo in the conference. I can't imagine having a worse situation than they have at quarterback. But still, they have playmakers. They got big dudes up front, and you have to go out there and do it, and they did. And to win a game like this, just to show yourself that when just about everything's going wrong, you're off schedule, you can win in an ugly one too. It doesn't have to be stylistic, and that's what really good teams do.
You, of course, were there once again. You've been at every home game except for the opener, as we've mentioned a few different times.
Yep.
What was this atmosphere like? Just because this was the first time we've seen the sun go down over Memorial. Oh, that's not quite true. There was a night game with Western Illinois at the beginning of the year, but that was night and day difference with atmosphere, I'm sure. This was a sold-out Memorial Stadium with the chance to do something that no Indiana football team had ever done, and you got to see it happen under the lights in the most dramatic finish we've seen throughout the season all year long. What was that like from somebody who was in the stadium? And also, I mean, for someone that's been a part of the program and you know what it's like to just be known for what you're known for, of course. This team is rewriting a brand new chapter in a book that people thought wasn't even possible to be written. So what was that like for you to see everything play out the way that it did while you were in Memorial Stadium?
Yeah, every week it just gets better and better. And anytime the sun starts to go down, gets a little chilly. It was perfect football weather. We didn't get there quite as early this week as we have in the past. I think I got there at like 11:30 instead of.
Plus, it wasn't a noon kick this time.
Yeah, but I was there at 5:45 in the morning before. But it's still, I mean, there's buzz. There's 100,000 people tailgating. It's everywhere. The excitement is everywhere. And when the sun starts going down, they shoot off some fireworks. People are engaged. I don't think anyone left start to finish. It was just pretty even game. And
I will say this. I don't mean to interrupt, but there was a moment. I think it was I don't know if this was a touchdown pass, but it was a play in the first half where Indiana was either about to score or they did score. I wish I remember the exact moment, but I had put a tweet out after the play happened and said, God, this Indiana team is so good or whatever. I thought Indiana was about to do what Indiana does and blow Michigan out of the water.
That was
Then, of
probably
course,
the first touchdown that was a little expansion fade to the north end zone corner.
yeah.
He's barely open, and Curtis Rourke just drops it in the bucket. Feels like they got no chance. We're just gonna run them out of the building. And you're right, they bowed up too. You got to give them a lot of credit. They had no business playing with that Indiana team outside of a couple guys up front on defense, and they
And
took
what's
it to him,
crazy,
man.
it feels like for the first time all year long, like obviously Indiana has a bye week this week, but they have Ohio State right after that. Ohio State has some film they can look at and be like, okay, this is what Michigan was able to do to kind of slow them down. And let me ask you this. How much of it do you think was Michigan versus Indiana just not being able to execute?
There's definitely a little bit of both, and I think it starts to run downhill because as soon as you get a little off schedule on offense early, it can go one of two ways, right? You reset and you explode, similar to how they did against Maryland. Throw two early picks, you get a little off schedule, and you settle in, you calm down, and you start diming it in again. This week, not that they didn't reset and play better, it just felt like we were a little off. Receivers not where they're supposed to be. Quarterback not putting the ball where he's supposed to. Some drops. Drops are number one drive killer outside of maybe a holding call, but I would argue a drop is even more so a drive killer. You're just, yeah, you're not quite in the rhythm. It just, I would say it's a combination of both. I think Michigan starts putting a lot of pressure, doing some things up front that gets Indiana off rhythm, and they just never really found it again. So, again, credit to them because they kept applying pressure, which I think made it hard to get yourself back into that kind of, okay, refocus. Let's go for it.
One thing that was interesting, the Curtis Rourke pick, that was, of course, probably at the worst position on the field where that could have happened.
Yeah.
The Indiana defense responds by, again, bowing up, and Michigan decides to not go for it on fourth down and kick the field goal. I think that really goes to show kind of what you talked about earlier. This Michigan offense and quarterback situation is horrible. About as bad as it could be for Michigan.
Being in that situation and opting to go make it a 2-score game from being a 2-score game on the 5-yard line when you may not get back there again tells you all you need to know about their confidence in the quarterback, confidence in their offense, confidence that they can move the ball against Indiana. They did not do that hardly at all. I'm not envious of that position. We've been there before. That's a bad place to be.
And I know we've said before that the two bye weeks that Indiana had this year, when you just look at them on paper, they were kind of positioned at the perfect scenarios, at least when you kind of pictured how things might have played out. I think regardless of the fact that your next opponent is Ohio State, after the way that you were just tested, the way that you were, there's no doubt in my mind that this is another perfect place to have your second bye week for this.
It felt like the most physical game of the year.
Yeah.
Both teams just threw haymakers at each other for 4 quarters. I think Indiana just got a little banged up. You're exactly right.
There were so many times where play had to stop for injury, I feel like. And the Ellison injury in particular, that was one of the hardest hits I've seen so far this year.
Yeah. Yeah, he did pop right up, so we'll see. But I saw he was at the basketball game today, so his brain must not be scrambled eggs, which is really good. It's a lot of weeks in a row. You've played a bunch of physical Big Ten games. We talk about the schedule, whatever, you can say whatever it is, but the most important thing were the bye weeks and where they fell, because you get a couple days this week to just recuperate, and then you still get those extra days to prepare for Ohio State. And kind of what you get with Ohio State is a couple explosive receivers, some lackluster offensive line play, although I think they were a little better against Penn State. I didn't watch Purdue because my guess is Indiana won't watch a second of that Purdue game.
You really think so? You really think
I
even the
mean,
way Signetti is, you don't think
the
they'll watch a
GAs
second?
will watch it and maybe the
Okay.
coaches, but I'm guessing a player won't see one play. There's no point. They're
That's
horrendous.
crazy.
I mean, you don't have time. There's not enough time in the week. You can go in there and watch it by yourself, but what are you going to learn?
Okay.
Purdue's a high school team. That's reality. So you're going to watch them against teams that are equal to you. You're going to be watching Penn State. You're going to be watching Oregon. That's kind of what you're going to be facing. That's the kind of scheme that you're going to see. Ohio State, without watching the game, this is just what I'm assuming, ran vanilla offense, vanilla defense, just relied on their skill and relied on the lack of skill in West Lafayette currently to just steamroll them. That's just what they're going to do. So you're not going to get a real picture of what Ohio State is.
Okay.
So you get a chance to break them down, and I it's taken me, I guess, however many weeks, but I'm having a hard time believing anybody's going to beat Indiana. I just am having a really, really hard time finding a scenario after watching them struggle so mightily against Michigan, because it was a struggle. They played terrible. Signetti would tell you that they played terrible on offense. On defense,
Yeah, defense
so
did exactly what they needed to do in this situation.
and that's the thing. You've won games in every way if you're Indiana. You've won it scoring 47 in a row against Michigan State. You've won it bowing up after 2 picks and then rolling on offense against Maryland. You've won it with no offensive rhythm or efficiency after the first drive against a Michigan team that still has 5-star players all over the field.
And two NFL defensive linemen that, even
Our
though you
first
didn't
round
have the
picks,
best line day, I mean, it could have been a worse line day, right?
they have 2 first-round picks on their defensive line, right?
I don't know that that's for sure, but I heard them reference the two guys, Kenneth
I'm pretty
Grant or
sure
something.
they've got
One
like
of them.
4 or 5 guys that are going to be picked in the top 3 rounds on their defense, and you still find a way with special teams, with defense, with kicking. Like I know Ohio State's got some players. I think their quarterback is not any good either. I think he does just enough. I mean, this is all relative. I think he's a middle of the road Big Ten quarterback, but
Yeah, he's
I'd
not
say
like you're
Curtis
going up
Rourke.
against Joe. I mean, I say Joe Burrow. He was with LSU, but he was originally with Ohio State. He's not going against somebody who's going to be an elite level NFL talent
Exactly.
quarterback.
This is just kind of an average Joe dude. This is not a typical Ohio State quarterback that can win you the game. He's going to rely on everything else to help him. Like, do you think they want Curtis Rourke? Yeah, probably. And that is just when you have better quarterback, you've got, I would say, I mean, this is a hot take, but your receiver room is as good outside of maybe Jeremiah Smith. I think
I don't deny that at all. I've said, not since the beginning, I knew Indiana's best position group coming into the year would probably be the receivers if they panned out the way they were supposed to. I didn't know they'd be the best in the Big Ten. But at this point in the season, there's not a single, you said this before too, there's not a single guy I would trade for anybody else in the Big Ten, I feel like.
Yeah, I think there is one caveat. I think it's the Jeremiah Smith kid from Ohio State. That kid is unreal, and he's going to get his, right? Even if he has 8 catches for 150 yards and a touchdown or 2, okay, right? They still got to do the rest.
Yeah.
They still got to – 150 yards isn't going to win them the game. So I think you find a way to get back in rhythm on offense. You start just RPO, run the ball. Let's get back to basics. Don't have to win the game in one throw, which is kind of what it felt like we got trying to do later in the game, just to hit a big one and hope that would kind of spring us, and we just never did.
And I agree with you, because there was several times in that second half where just me watching, I was like, I feel like all they need is one more touchdown. They just need one more touchdown, and they can just kind of sit there.
It felt like
relax.
for 4 or 5 drives in a row, like one more touchdown, this game's over.
And they had to be what they're thinking like. They had to be what they're thinking.
They did that. They tried to score touchdowns right now. And is it not necessarily their MO to score touchdowns right now? Sometimes, right? Sometimes you got to put together a drive and milk some clock. But with 4 or 5 NFL draft picks on a defense, putting together an 80-yard drive isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. So if you can just hit a big chunk play against their secondary that's had some issues, that can bust the game wide open, because then they got to start throwing it, and It just, you never hit on any of those plays, and that's why it was a dogfight the way that it was. But yeah, I think get back to what you're good at, and everything's in front of you. I mean, Eric, you talk about, oh, well, if you just beat Ohio State, but even if they don't beat Ohio State, I think you're going into this game very confident that you have a very good chance to win.
Oh, yeah. There's no reason to think. Of course, when you're looking at this at the beginning of the year, everybody, just like we said with Michigan, you chalked it up as Michigan and Ohio State being the two automatic losses. Honestly, this season is an example in and of itself of like, why the hell do we even do this? You know, if Indiana gets to the point to where they're having this good of a season, they're going to have a chance against a game like Ohio State, because why don't you have a chance? Yeah, they probably have more talented prospects on the field, but like we saw, that was true with Michigan, and they're 5-5 this year. If it doesn't come together the way that you hope it's supposed to, that will ruin everything that you have. And clearly, Indiana has made the most of this new way in putting together your roster that Cignetti has done by bringing in all of this experience, whether it be from the G5 level or some random ACC teams like Wake Forest or wherever it may be. You get Curtis Rourke from the MAC. You bring all of these lovable misfits, and they find a way to make it all work together. And this is what you have right now, something that's never happened. And I mean, this is honestly like something out of a fever dream. I don't mean to, if I'm getting too, I mean, I don't really know what the best way to say it is other than that, because if anybody tells you in any world, any year, doesn't matter what's going on, that Indiana is going to be 10-0 in any season of football, that sounds like complete nonsense in any other world than what we're living in today.
Yeah. And I have issues with two things that you said.
Sure, go ahead.
One, I heard somebody else call them misfits. They weren't.
It was probably Jeffrey the Greek, because I believe I took that phrase from him, if I'm being honest.
I heard it on TV, actually, or one of the YouTube videos. They're not misfits. The reason that he went to get them is because they were the opposite of that. They were really, really good players that fit the system really well and had accolades out the wazoo. They were just playing in a division that was too low, or in a conference that wasn't good enough for them. So I guess that's technically a misfit, but the misfit implies that they just weren't getting along. No, these are the best players on their team that weren't given a chance by anybody else. They had production. They had the accolades. They just had on an Old Dominion helmet instead of a Georgia helmet. Because that's all. The misfits are the 1 year and done guys from Alabama that were 5 stars that don't go to class and don't go to your meetings, but they're an Alabama 5-star, so you still recruit them. They come to your campus. They suck. We had those guys. We had a lot of those guys at Indiana when I was there. You go because, he went to Alabama, he must be good. No, that guy sucks. He done nothing, and he will do nothing. These kids were proven. They show they know how to work. Their misfit may have been that they're on the wrong team because they're not good enough, but their fit in terms of skill and ability, they play the part. And then the second thing I want to push back on is, to us, it feels like kind of a fever dream, right? Like, oh my God, it's unbelievable. We're 10-0.
Yeah.
That's kind of worn off on me because of the way they win.
Yeah, and I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean
I know what you were saying.
All this feels like it's false stupid. And it's not real.
Yes.
So what you're just saying is that it's no longer like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. We can't believe this is happening. This is reality, and this is what it's going to be moving forward for you.
You can believe it's happening because of the way they win. And I know what you were saying, but I hear the fever dream from other people, and it just kind of reminded me, like at the stadium, you're like, can you believe this? This is so. And yeah, as a fan, I guess, no, I can't believe it. But can I believe that this team in particular, forget the logo on their helmet, is winning a lot? Yeah, I can, because they smash everyone in the face physically. And that's, I think,
what it is for me is it's more so that I can't believe that Indiana has gotten, and I don't think lucky is the right word, but just they found this guy in Curt Cignetti that knew exactly what he was doing, when it feels like, I mean, we've swung and missed so many times for, over 100 years, right? And there's been some guys here that have done some good things, but I mean, this dude's in his first year. He's not lost a game. He's never lost anywhere. And I don't mean to make this like, let's just praise Curt Cignetti about everything that he's done, but like, he's done what there's probably so many other coaches who would ever be afraid to do, just come to a low life program like Indiana, and he's made it everything that he's ever probably could have imagined to be and more, and then some, because we know he wants to get to the Big Ten championship, go to the playoff, all that good stuff. But I think that's what it is. It's just knowing that the Indiana Hoosiers have a guy like that who genuinely cares about creating winning football.
Yeah, it's it's the verbal meme here. This is maybe not the best radio if you're listening on the radio, but it's the LeBron James in the pool. I can't believe this is my life as an Indiana fan. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's the fever dream is I can't believe it's happening to us.
Yes, that's probably how I should have worded it in the beginning.
That I totally agree with. The fever dream is not the team.
Yes.
Because they are a problem for anybody. I watch them. I watch every other team in the nation. And I'm like, yeah, I think we beat them. Like, and that's crazy. And it's real. I used to like when in the last couple of years when we did the other IU preview show and we're
back when we were sad,
dude, 2-8 or 1-9, and I'm like Hoosiers 10,000,006 to 0 or whatever, right? And you're joking around like. It's real. When you watch just play for play what other teams are doing out of any conference, out of anywhere, Indiana matches up. And not only do they match up, they excel in most of those position battles. So it's crazy, yes, that it's happening to us. And definitely don't take it for granted. But this team's real. They can win in all kinds of ways. And I bet that stadium's a little bit nervous in Columbus. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's again this really it's the last. I mean, there's a few more monkeys that you get off your back that really were never monkeys, but it's the last monkey that's on your back in terms of you haven't beaten this team in umpteen million years, whatever it is. Is it 1980 something? I don't know the exact year.
They called it the darkest day in Ohio State football history.
That's real. Heard that.
Anthony Thompson had like 350 yards rushing on them. They called it their coach. It was one of their famous coaches. I'm blanking on his name right now. Called it the darkest day in OSU history. But you go in there and beat them, and you'll probably be number 2 in the country.
And you unofficially kind of punch yourself into the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, you pretty much. I mean, unless the team just gets locked in the elevator or something against Purdue, like the whole team is locked in the elevator for hours and hours. I'm pretty sure we could roll out me, you, Dustin, and Dustin's buddies and beat Purdue the way they're playing right now. So you beat Ohio State, you pretty much secure an undefeated season, a shot at
the number 1 team in the country, which is crazy. You're playing at that point, the Big Ten championship game becomes you're playing for the 1 seed in the playoff, which is wild at that point.
Correct. To be the number 1 team in the whole land.
Oh, man.
That's a real thing.
If
you beat Ohio State, you very likely jump all the way to 2, and the Big Ten championship will be a 1-2 matchup.
That's wild. Last question I have for you is kind of along the same line with the playoffs. Where do you see them being ranked this week after you see a couple of teams like Georgia losing, as well as, of course, Miami? But you also have, maybe some SEC teams that will jump. I tend to think they'll just kind of routinely jump up to like number 6. But what do you think?
That would be great if they just went to number 6. But unfortunately, that's still brand bias that we just dealt with. I mean, Penn State's done nothing better than what we've done except have a close loss to Ohio State at home. Okay, but they still rank them above us because they started above us. I'm very worried about Ole Miss and Alabama jumping us because we didn't just handle Michigan and their record's 5-5 now. I just don't think that.
What's annoying is that if Michigan has an SEC logo next to their name and you do that, then they take it as, oh, wow, you beat this great Michigan team.
That's exactly it. If Ole Miss and Alabama weren't in the SEC, I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Like if SMU beat whoever by 40, they're not going to jump us. But, it's the SEC. So I think that the Big Ten right now has 4 teams in the top 5 of the AP poll. And it's a lot more likely that the SEC gets 4 teams in to the playoff than the Big Ten. in
Yeah.
my mind. And I don't think that's based on percentages, but just on my opinion of what you see every year of these people just loving the SEC. And we'll find out a lot on Tuesday if they're respected or not. I think if they don't move up to 5 or 6, the play-in game becomes Ohio State. You got to go in there and win, and that's just the reality.
So you think if they're 5 or 6, do you think they've already solidified their chance or their spot?
I think barring like a 30-point loss at Ohio State,
yeah, you can lose as long as it's close
if you get to 5 or 6. But if you stay 8-ish, they'll drop
just move up one spot, maybe just up to 7.
I think 7 is on the border. I think you're mostly safe at 7. But if you get in that 8, they're going to drop you at about 11. And then conference champions has to go in. And then you start really playing with fire. And you don't deserve to, but you do.
All right. Well, hopefully it ends up not being the case. Didn't mean to end on such an edgy note, but hey, this is the new reality for Indiana football, right?
Yeah. Other teams have a lot more history. And they say that they're not basing it off the logo, but they are. That's what the eye test is. When you hear those 2 words, it's the logo that they're looking at. Nobody talks about Indiana passing the eye test or BYU passing the eye test, but they talk about Ole Miss with 2 losses passing the eye test because they beat another team that passes the eye test. It also has 2 losses. So, it's what you're fighting for this year. You're going to have to put together a bunch of good years to get rid of it. So just keep winning.
And by the way, Cignetti, I don't believe he's going anywhere, especially after this year. Now that Florida is not moving on for Billy Napier, I don't see a single job opening up that Indiana fans should be scared of.
I wasn't even scared of Florida. Absolutely. I think he's here next year and probably the years to come. Indiana's crushing in the NIL, something people don't know and don't think about. They're like up to 13th in total NIL dollars in the whole country. So are you going to go somewhere like Florida that's 12th and they suck and all their fans are crazy and have way higher expectations? You could have delivered a 7-5 season at Indiana and fans would have showered you with gold. Now that obviously the expectations shift a little bit because you're 10-0, but you're not a Florida fan that is unrealistic. Similar. I mean, I'm a Miami fan. That's why I feel like I can talk. Yeah. We're just as unrealistic and stupid as those idiots in Gainesville. So I know what that's like. You come to a place like Indiana, everyone's going to love you. They're going to name streets after you. They may name the whole dang stadium after you after this year. It feels like it's a pretty good spot to be for you and your family.
Yeah. Mitchell, as always, I appreciate you coming on. And especially, I can tell you told me before we got on that your voice was a little shot. Nice.
I was loud.
Being loud at Memorial Stadium.
I was more loud this year. Of all the teams that we would play, Michigan fans were the worst. And Michigan players were the least respectful. So, yeah, when you pound them like you do and you don't even play good, you let them hear about it, which is exactly what I did. The youngest kid to the oldest lady.
I'm just going back. I every time you say something else pops in my brain. Did you have another moment where you're walking up the stands yelling at Michigan fans? Did that happen on Saturday?
No, was I doing that before?
No, you told me before that when you went to the Gator Bowl, you went up and down screaming at
that was
fans.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
No.
So, not the same thing. Okay.
It's kind of nice. We sit in all the former players, so it's very friendly where we're sitting.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, a lot of excitement and happiness. But the tailgate fields, a lot of very overzealous Michigan fans talking about where they're going to come here and out physical us.
Well, they can go have fun with being 5-5.
I was going to say enjoy basketball season.
Yeah, enjoy basketball season. I can't even fully. I know I have to pay attention to both now, but it's so hard to care about basketball.
Did you watch a basketball game today?
No, I was at Bills Colts game today. That's why I got my Bills shirt on.
That's why you weren't back.
That's why we were recording late today. Yes.
Gotcha. You were 10 minutes from my house, dude.
So if we weren't in such a hurry, I was thinking about, we should be talking about this off the air, honestly. I was talking with my wife. We were like, you know what? Maybe we should try to get dinner with Mitchell and his wife. But we didn't do that, and that's my fault.
10 minutes from my house. Could have done this in person.
We could have done it in person. But we are going to do this again next week, and this team will still be undefeated because they don't play. And we look forward to talking more about you know what's at stake. We know what's at stake, but we'll be closer and closer to that
Pray
game against
for
Ohio State.
Oregon losses, Texas losses, Penn State losses, and Tennessee losses, and an Ohio State win, because we want to be the ones that knock them down.
I still want to. Honestly, I'd like to knock down an undefeated Oregon. That'd be pretty cool. But either way,
True.
all right, we'll call this a day. Mitchell, appreciate you as always.
Yeah, buddy.
Big thanks as always to Mitchell Paige for taking some time. And I do feel like I go through this little song and dance every week, but I do appreciate him being willing to do this with me. And just, I'm sure he enjoys this season more than I do, because he has ties to the Indiana football program that I will never understand, considering he is a former player. So I'm glad he gets to go on this ride, and I'm very happy to be a part of it as well. So let's get into a little bit of Indiana basketball, because I'm sure many of you who watched the game against Eastern Illinois were very, you probably thought it was a rerun, right? Because Indiana, through the first half, they let Eastern Illinois stick around and even have the lead at halftime. And we've seen Mike Woodson teams. I mean, we've not seen them lose to opponents like this, but we've seen these games be a little too close for comfort oftentimes. But here's the difference between what we had in years past and what we've seen through 2 games so far. And that's Indiana finds a way in the second half to pull away from these teams instead of making it a close game. Of course, final score being 90-55. Incredible response in the second half after letting a lowly OVC team in Eastern Illinois kind of go toe-to-toe with you. And I'd say that's probably just based on, early returns from this team. The biggest, I don't want to call it a weakness, but maybe the biggest thing that this team probably has to work on is executing from the jump, right? Because, and maybe part of this is them getting to that point where they're confident in their own abilities and kind of all of these different pieces meshing together, because you have brought in a ton of transfers, and there's going to be moments where maybe things seem out of sync, especially in these early games. And that's why I'm not really worried about the fact that the schedule is kind of weaker, at least the way that most people see it. And that is true. I'm not trying to say that like I think it's super tough or anything, but I don't have a problem with these early games being against no names, especially as you prepare for a jump in competition when you go down to the Bahamas, because this is going to give Indiana. Now you got 2 more games before you go down to the Bahamas. You have South Carolina, which is a Power 4 opponent, even though they may not be a very good one. You have that, and then you also have UNC Greensboro. That 4-game sample size is going to give this team a chance to kind of figure out what they can be like together, how they work together on the floor, and kind of, create some chemistry before they really up the ante in competition when you get to the battle for Atlantis. And speaking of that, by the way, their first opponent in the battle for Atlantis really shocked me the other day. They took on, I'm talking about Louisville, of course. They took on Tennessee at home. And of course, the same Tennessee team that Indiana defeated in exhibition play on the road, 66-62. And I fully expected Louisville, based on their early results and the way they're kind of some high-flying 3-point shooters, I thought they were going to beat Tennessee at home. But it ended up being a beatdown on Tennessee's end. They came into the Yum Center and completely, Rick Barnes just picked apart this Louisville team because, and I'm stealing something from my friend Nick, who I work with. He of course, being a Louisville fan and covers Louisville very closely. But Rick Barnes just dared Louisville to just use their gimmicky offense. And that's really what it is. They rely so heavily on 3-point success that if they aren't hitting, that's going to bite them in the rear end sometimes. And I do think that Louisville team probably has some good shooters, and there'll be some nights where it's just tough for them to hit. But that's going to be Indiana's biggest key when they get to Louisville, is really just not being afraid to let Louisville shoot the ball. And, at the same time, just playing lockdown defense. I think if Indiana prides themselves on good defensive play, I think the rest will take care of themselves. Even Mackenzie Mbako said that. And speaking of Mackenzie Mbako, very pleased to see him once again put up a good number, 18 points, 2 steals, 4 assists, 7 rebounds. This is early signs that Mackenzie Mbako is really planning to take a step forward this year. And I know it's early, and I know you had other good performances too. Malik Renew, 17 points. Umar Ballo, 17 points. Bryson Tucker found double figures of 12 points. Everything else kind of a mixed bag, of course. But I don't think Indiana fans should be worried if, and that's probably a weird way to phrase it. I think it should be very exciting, honestly, if Mackenzie Mbako is your best player on the floor. To see him make that sophomore jump, and again, it's only against SIU Edwardsville and Eastern Illinois, but to see him, I mean, night and day difference from where Mackenzie Mbako was at the beginning of last season versus now, because if he ends up being somebody you can rely on night in and night out, that's just another weapon that you have, because I think you're going to get consistent performances from Malik Renew and maybe Umar Ballo as well. I do think there'll probably be nights where Umar Ballo struggles a little bit. And honestly, each of these guys are going to have nights where they don't live up to their potential. But I do think it's very promising what we've seen early out of Mackenzie Mbako, and will only continue to be reassured by all of that. The more we see this heading into the season. I mean, if we keep seeing, double figure performances, as we probably should, honestly, for Mackenzie Mbako, and even some, that get close to that 20 point. I mean, of course, he had 31 in the opener, but if he keeps up putting numbers like that, there's no doubt he will be one of the top NBA prospects in this year's draft, because he was expected to be that last year, and just things didn't pan out for him in that way. But shout out to him for really putting in the work so far this offseason. And I think it's paying early dividends. We'll have to see how things, kind of make their way or continue to shape up as the season goes on. But I have reason to think that he will indeed be an important piece of this Indiana team. And really, Bryson Tucker impressing early too. He's somebody that I feel like was a big wild card coming into the year, considering he was a late addition to the freshman roster after you lost Liam McNeely. But now 2 games where he's had double figures, and of course one of them was an exhibition. But to see him do what he's done, and I say see him as if I watched the game, but just to see the numbers on paper that he's been able to put up, the performances that he has. I mean, 5 for 7 shooting, 2 for 2 on free throws. Didn't take any 3-pointers, but you don't need everybody taking threes. And I'm sure some people look at the 3-point attempts, 18 attempts for the game, and you're thinking they need to be shooting more. I don't think that this Indiana team, especially under a Mike Woodson coach team, I don't think they need to shoot 1 million threes. 18 is probably a fine number if you're making more. And some people say, well, you need to shoot more to make more. And there's truth to that as well. But Mike Woodson coach teams, whether you like it or not, are going to be based around good paint play, and the perimeter shooting is going to be a complement. Now, I do think they still need to improve the 3-point shooting, of course, and hopefully you see some guys find some more confidence. I really hope to see Trey Galloway be a little more confident behind the 3-point line. And Luke Goody, he made his first couple of threes the other night, and I'm sure there's going to be nights where he goes off from 3-point range. And that's going to be, of course, a plus for Indiana. And hopefully he has more nights where he's consistently good versus the latter where he just doesn't make anything. And he hasn't found the best rhythm just yet, but give him some time. I'm sure Luke Goody will end up living up to expectations one way or another once we get further along in the season. But yeah, so this Indiana basketball team preparing for South Carolina. I'm trying to figure out what day that's on. And you heard this in the conversation with Mitchell. It is so very hard. And again, we've never experienced this, right? It is so hard as a fan, right, to care about Indiana basketball right now. And what I mean, not that I don't want them to do well, but because of what we're seeing with Indiana football, it's hard to be in basketball mode. And I got to say, this is probably what the football powers always experience. The Ohio States, the Michigans, the programs that succeed almost year in and year out. They don't have time to care about the early season of college football because they know their team's probably going to be competing for either a spot in the national championship or, a spot in the playoff, whatever it may be, all that type of stuff. So this is the first time we're getting a dose of the crossover where you gotta find a way to shift your attention to both. And I am glad basketball season's here, and I hope they have just as much success as the football team. But in the early season, it's been tough to be like, oh my gosh, it's basketball season, where it's usually when is basketball season, right? Usually they're the I've always hated the portion of the fan base that when we got to the middle part of football or you have your first bad loss and it's like, all right, when's basketball season? And I get it. Basketball's fun, but I've always wanted so bad to see a good Indiana football team that's why I always hated seeing people just say, oh, when's basketball season? And I'm glad that for the first time ever, we haven't had to, I say first time ever. There were good teams a few years ago, but for the first time ever, like even now, at this point in the season, like we still know that there's plenty to play for. And of course, I found a way to transition over to football, right? Even after I was talking about basketball. But yeah, South Carolina on Saturday, so no midweek games for Indiana, and also good timing. So we'll have basketball this Saturday whenever Indiana is off for football. So it's nice we'll be able to give our entire attention to South Carolina coming to Simon Scott Assembly Hall. And guess what? It is on Peacock. So go ahead and get your Peacock apps out. And, it's the first of many Peacock games for the Hoosiers this year. And I've mentioned that a few times. Let's go ahead and get an official count of how many games are going to be on the cock this year, as they say. And I know I hesitated to say that last time I referenced Peacock, but why not just full send it, right? So, of course, South Carolina going to be on Peacock. Let's see what else. We'll have Rutgers on January 2nd on Peacock, and that's at home in Bloomington. So that's 2 Bloomington games on the cock. We'll have Illinois in Bloomington on Peacock on January 14th. So that's number 3. We'll have Wisconsin on the road on February 4th on Peacock, number 4. Michigan State on the road on February 11th on Peacock, number 5. And I think, one more, Washington on the road on March 1st on Peacock. That's your 6th. So Indiana will be on Peacock 6 different times this season, the first being this Saturday at, is it 3:30? I'm trying to pull it back up. Or 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock this Saturday, November 16th. And, I'm actually going to watch that game. Thank you very much. We're going to wrap this up here in a second because we're already at the hour mark. And I've had fun this morning. I know we didn't do CFP projections today, and I'm probably going to be done with those just because at this point now, like the projections, it's more like just guessing what seed they're going to get with the college football playoff rankings that happen on Tuesday. And as you heard me chat with Mitchell earlier, I think we're going to see them at least jump up 2 spots after the Georgia loss and, of course, the Miami loss. I think they'll definitely jump Miami. And they'll definitely jump both of those teams. But what worries me a little bit is what they do with LSU and Alabama with their big wins, or excuse me, Ole Miss and Alabama, because Ole Miss beat LSU. But what they do with them, I don't see a world where LSU jumps Indiana because they do have a common opponent in UCLA that Indiana dismantled on the road and LSU struggled with a little bit at home. And Alabama, I know it's Alabama, but you lost to Vanderbilt. And I don't care if this is a better Vanderbilt team than years past. You lost to Vanderbilt and you're Alabama. I'm sorry. That might be a stupid answer for some people, but especially there's a 2-loss Alabama should not be jumping an undefeated. Doesn't even matter if it's Indiana. No 2-loss team should be ranked ahead of an undefeated team. None. And I'll just end it right there. So looking forward to seeing what the rankings show for the Hoosiers on Tuesday. We'll react to all that and more on Wednesday. And that's going to wrap it up for today's show. So appreciate you all watching and listening as always. And thanks for letting me, kind of have my little personal moment at the beginning of this show. And I look forward to that as well, of course. I'm very excited to have a little one on the way. Due in May, by the way. May 8th is the due date. So until Wednesday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.